Hi, welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be starting in 10 minutes. So do whatever you have to do to get ready, and we'll meet you back here in 10. Hello, welcome to today's webinar on garden planning. My name is Deborah, and I'm a volunteer at the Minnesota State Horticultural Society. If you're not a member of MSHS, now is a good time to join. Members receive not only our award-winning magazine, but also discounts at nurseries and greenhouses, free webinars, and more. Your membership dollars allow us to bring great programming like this to all of you. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. You are attending the webinar today in listen-only mode. So you will be able to hear our presenter, but we cannot hear you. That way there won't be background noise. If you have questions for our presenter, you can type those in on the panel on the right side of your screen. Go ahead and ask those questions as they arise. Courtney is happy to answer them during the webinar. She enjoys the interaction. We'll also be covering questions at the end of the webinar. If you do not see the panel, look for an orange arrow in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Click on that arrow and it'll pop out the panel. And now, please welcome today's speaker, Courtney Tchida, the Community Outreach Manager here at MSHS. She has over 20 years of experience working in horticulture and food systems education. Courtney spent 16 years as Student Program Coordinator for the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture and Farm Manager for Cornucopia Student Organic Farm at the University of Minnesota. She has experience growing a wide variety of edible crops, planning and implementing gardens for schools, farms, and food shelf gardens. Take it away, Courtney.
Thanks, Deborah. Welcome, everyone, to the session on garden planning. We'll get started here. So here at the Hort Society, we have a strong mission centered around education, trying to just teach people how to be successful in their gardens. And it's a really important mission to me that I'm really excited about. And excited to just plant more seeds throughout Minnesota and get people going on gardening this year. This is the Student Organic Farm where I hail from the last several years. I've been with the Hort Society for about the last almost 3 months now. We had about 6 acres of certified organic land that we were growing a wide variety of different things on. That's a picture of me with peaches. Growing peaches is one of my favorite things. And actually really just planting peach trees and then getting to harvest them, pruning them once a year. Is really exciting. I'm hoping to put another peach tree in my backyard this year. So I'm going to launch a poll here just to get us started and just kind of find out where people are at in the process. If people are done with their garden plan for this year, if you have kind of a rough idea of what you're going to grow and where you're going to grow it, or if you're just getting started. So I'm going to let this go for just a minute or two here, and then we'll share the results. So far, it looks like a large percentage of you are kind of in the, I have a rough idea of what and where I'm going to grow. That's exactly where I'm at. I'm actually installing a bunch of new raised beds in my backyard this year. I am starting some straw bales because I've never done straw bale gardening, and I figure now's the time to start trying that. So it's just kind of fun to just have a rough idea, just getting started. So it looks like about 8% have their garden plan done, 67% or so have a rough idea of what's going to go where, and 25% are just getting started. So that's great. Okay, I'm going to close that. So you can just see those results, which is kind of fun. Okay, So getting started, I think one of the most important things to start out with thinking about is sort of your site and assessing how much light you have. Food crops really, really need sunlight. Ideally, 2/3 of that sunlight is going to be available each day on June 21st, which is the longest day of the year. That's the day of the year that we get 15 hours of sunlight. So you want to have at least sort of 10 hours of that 15 hours available on that day. April through September, typically you have, you want at least 8 of the 12 hours that are available for most food crops. 5 to 6 hours is not enough for all crops. What crops is it enough for? Well, let's talk about those. So crops that can tolerate a little bit more shade, salad greens and spinach, arugula, a lot of the greens, so things like mustard greens, Asian greens, chard, and kale, they can thrive in a little bit of a shadier area. Broccoli, peas. The peas I have grown for the last several years have just thrived in shade. I've grown in a partially shady area that gets 5 to 6 hours of sun, and they have been producing. They'll start producing, in May and go into, into almost the beginning of August. You're almost sick of the peas by then, and so that's a really good crop to try in a shady spot. Beets and radishes, turnips can also work in there. Scallions, herbs. Pansies are also another good kind of flower for shady spots. So you often get a lot longer of a bloom time on them than if they're in full sun. And then those kind of cucurbic crops, those vining crops that like squashes and cucumbers, those are really like ancestrally sort of understory plants to begin with. And so they can do well in a shady spot. So then I think it's important to think about, once you've assessed what kind of light you have, thinking about what you like to grow and what do you want to grow. I think that it's important to think about, are there certain varieties that you want to grow that are hard to find? I really, really love heirloom tomatoes, and I have like my laundry list of my favorite heirloom tomatoes that I know if I don't start those seeds myself, I'm not going to be able to find those varieties in the farmer's market or at the grocery store. I love Romanesco. That's that weird fractally looking vegetable there that's kind of a cross between broccoli and cauliflower. It has a really yummy nutty flavor to it when you roast it. I love those. So growing those would be important to me. Shallots are a crop that, is a higher value crop. And so it can be really kind of expensive if you have to buy it. And it's super easy to grow. So thinking about growing, crops that are high value that might be expensive in the grocery store, that you can grow easily are definitely ones to think about. And then, thinking about things that are easy. Eggplants are really easy. Again, you want to make sure that you're growing the variety that you want. Do you want the orange pumpkin ones? Do you want the big purple ones? Do you want the long, skinny, white or green ones? You have lots of options. So thinking about all those things. And I think it's important, like I don't love eggplant, so I don't know that I want to grow eggplants. So making sure that you're growing things that you like is really important. The next thing to think about is, how are you starting the plants? Are you direct seeding them? Are you transplanting them? Are buying transplants? Are you starting transplants? Direct seeding, it's less expensive because you just have to buy the seeds. The seeds are available from lots of different places. I mean, you can sometimes even get them at the grocery store or the hardware store these days. Seed catalogs are and online stores are sometimes kind of wiped out and back ordered right now this time of year, just because all the interest and demand in growing things. But one of my favorite places to look for seeds is actually a seed search engine called pickacarrot.com. You can go in there and click on, do a search for like carrots, and it'll show you a bunch of different places where you can get carrots, a bunch of different varieties of carrots. You can search for organic or all the seeds, and it's just a really nice source for finding seeds this time of year. The cons of direct seeding is that, you're putting seeds in and then you're waiting for them to germinate. And you're not going to necessarily have like a super uniform stand. I have planted in the last month some peas and spinach, radishes. Those are the things that are starting to pop up right now. And even like my peas, like I have them in a row and it's kind of spotty. Like, I'll have like a clump of them here and there and then a little gap and then another clump of them. And that just is sort of a result of what happens when you when you direct seed. You don't necessarily get like a super uniform stand all the time. Those seeds may still come and germinate, but then they might be just a little bit behind the other ones, and that's okay. You just have to kind of roll with it at this point. Transplants, on the other hand, a lot of times that they are earlier and faster than seed. They definitely have kind of an improved final stand of plants because you've like put a plant in every place where you want one and you know it's there. I mean, other things can happen to it after the fact, but at least to start out, you've started out with the plants that you want growing where they are. Obviously, that can cost more. There can be less varietal selection. You may have to grow your own transplants, and you may, need to protect them from early season frosts. It depends really on the crop. So, if you've got tomatoes right now, yeah, you need to protect them. A lot of the cool season crops are, those peas, the spinach, and the radishes. They all got snowed on last week. That little snowstorm that we had a week ago. And that all melted and they're all just fine. So they're fine. Cool season stuff, it's probably, warm enough at this point to just let them be out there. I'm gonna launch another little poll here. What seeds have you started for the season? Have you started stuff inside? Have you started directly sown things outside? Have you done any winter sowing in containers outside? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Or not yet. And those are all kind of good options. And you can pick more than one, which is kind of fun. So you're not stuck with just one option there. I've actually done all of these things. I've done direct seeding outside for a couple of things. I just planted faba beans this week because I've always wanted to grow faba beans outside. I've started them in the greenhouse before, but I've never direct seeded those. I also have a like little I probably have 15 or 20 winter sown containers out of my backyard. And then I've got some tomatoes and basil and ground cherries that are going downstairs. So I can share the results here of this. We've got 53% of the people have started stuff inside. We've got 31% have direct sown outside, 12% have winter sown in containers, and 38% not yet. So that's great. It's definitely not too late. Still lots of time to do all of those things. So this is winter sowing in case anybody wants to know more information about that. Basically, you take a milk jug, you kind of cut 3 sides of the milk jug around so you have kind of a hinge by the handle. You poke a bunch of holes in the bottom, fill it up with soil, put some seeds on the top, tape up the sides, set them outside, take the lid off, let them get rained on, let them get snowed on. Make sure that they have enough water. So if the soil is starting to look kind of dry, water them. I've been watering mine probably every other day outside just to make sure that they have enough water. And then what happens is it acts as like a little microclimate mini greenhouse. And as the air temperature warms up, the soil temperature warms up, and then those little seeds will start to germinate and grow. And then they're kind of perfectly timed so that when it's time to plant those plants outside, they're the right size and all ready to go. So I've got spinach that's just about ready to be transplanted. I've got kale and broccoli, cabbage, all growing. I've got some herbs and flowers as well. So it's just kind of a fun thing, and you can do this now. It's actually probably about the right time to start warm season crops too. So you could actually plant tomatoes and peppers, eggplants, even ground cherries. They'll be a little bit behind the ones versus the ones if you'd started them inside. But I think that they would still catch up with plenty of time. That's something that I kind of need to still experiment with just to see how well that works going forward. Thinking about planting, outside, you've got kind of grid or row spacing as an option. There's also sort of the biointensive or hexagonal planting method. I really, really love this idea. Basically, instead of growing kind of things wide apart, you grow things more intensively so that there's less room for weeds to grow. The idea is that at maturity, each plant would have just enough room around it so that it can be mature and just barely touch the plant next to it. So they're not really, every plant has just the right amount of room. This 6-inch kind of spacing works well for things like lettuce, beets, turnips. There's a whole wide variety of plants that this can work really well for. You can kind of play with the different spacings if it's, you know, more dense for things that are even thinner like radishes, or things that are even a little bit further apart. I know I've done like fennel and scallions on like a 9-inch spacing in this kind of pattern in the past. Any questions that I need to check in with?
Actually, we do have a few. Dawn wants to know, what was that seed search engine again?
Yeah, I will put it in the chat. It's pickacarrot.com.
Excellent. And just so everyone knows, you can access the chat in that panel on the right-hand side. It should be near the bottom. You can just click on the little triangle next to it and it'll bring it down.
Excellent.
Most of these other questions I know you're going to get to. I just have one other is, Shelley wants to know where you can find organic straw bales.
I would check with like Mother Earth Garden and Eggplant Urban Farm Supply. Those are the two places that I've gotten them in the past. I think there's other places, like there's a farm supply store out on Highway 36 that probably has, I know that they have straw bales. I don't know if they're organic or not. I actually got an organic straw bale from Eggplant last year that was actually completely like wrapped in plastic, which was awesome because then I didn't get straw all over my car when I was transporting it. That was kind of an exciting development. Yeah. Okay. Well, then we'll keep.
Great. And the rest of them we will get to.
Okay, sounds good. So garden bed layouts, a lot of people probably already have their beds laid out, but if you're starting from scratch, I just want to give you some ideas. A lot of times, you know, you start with, people just have kind of long, straight beds that are anywhere from 2 to 6 feet wide, and then however many feet long you have to utilize. The raised beds that I'm building in my backyard are going to be about 4 feet wide, which is a little bit deep, but I want to have enough room to put like 2 rows of different things in there. But you know, these are pretty easy to prep with machinery. They're easy to harvest. They have a nice kind of neat and organized layout and appearance, but they can waste some space in terms of like your pathways and things like that. One option is to consider like a keyhole bed. So the idea here is that you have a bed where the space that you would put the key in is actually the pathway, and then the area around it is the bed. These are usually about, you know, at the most kind of 6 feet wide, where 3 feet into the middle of the bed is kind of from the tip of your nose to the tips of your fingers, and you can reach in and reach the middle from all of the sides. And so that's kind of a fun option to consider if you've got the space for that. It really maximizes the bed space and minimizes the pathway space. Another option that's kind of fun is an herb spiral. If you want to have an herb garden, this is a fun way to create the microclimates that each kind of herb needs. So at the bottom, it's going to usually be wetter. At the top, it'll be drier. There's usually a sunnier side and a shadier side. So it doesn't have to be very tall. It might only be maybe, you know, a foot in elevation in the middle. But it's kind of a cool way to create microclimates and to grow a wide diversity of plants all in one space. I kind of also like this idea of thinking about like leaf and branch kind of shapes, where you could have like a leaf shape and the veins of the leaf are going to mimic the pathways. You use the veins for the pathways, and then the inner leaf area is for planting. Nets and grids, this is kind of similar to the hexagonal. Instead of being in triangles, the plants are in diamonds. It just gives a little bit more space for the plants in between them. And so those are all just options to consider as you're laying out in the bed, or you're laying out the bed as you go. I'm going to jump into companions next. So this is the idea where 2 plants are going to sort of benefit each other by being in close proximity to each other spatially. This is one of my favorite pictures of companion planting. You can see that there's eggplant in there, there's lettuce in there, there's a ton of herbs and flowers. There's basil, there's thyme, there's rosemary, there's There's lots of flowers too, in terms of like marigolds and calendula, and even some smaller flowering things too. And I think that those flowers are so important in terms of creating beneficial insect habitat, and just, creating an environment that is densely planted and really beautiful as well. Where companion planting comes from is really fascinating. There's some of it comes from historical observation where people have like watched, like, hey, when I plant this next to this, they both do better. There's also some horticultural science and research behind some of the companion planting suggestions. And then there's some like crazy, like sensitive crystallization tests that they did in the early 1900s, where they like took the essential oils of different plants and like put them on paper and watched like how they interacted and made determinations on what things could be good companions based on that. That's a little on the edge of voodoo to me, or just not, as scientifically found as the other two options. So I tend to like want to suggest that you experiment a lot with these, figure out what works best for you. There's, I've tried a bunch of different companion planting options over time, and fennel is a great example where like all the books on companion planting say like fennel doesn't agree with anything and fennel doesn't do well, next to anything. It needs to have its own spot. And in my experience, fennel does just fine planted nearby other things. So you have to kind of take some of those like recommendations with a grain of salt, and try them for yourself. One of the most like ancient companion examples that we have is the Three Sisters gardens, from the Native Americans, where they have corn and beans and squash interplanted together. The idea is that the corn grows up and is kind of a stalk for the beans to climb on, and then the squash also is the ground cover around and kind of smothers the weeds around the other crops. This is a great example, and you can, take analogous plants. So you could substitute in maybe melons in place for the squash, or you could do other tall things in place of the corn, or even other vining crops in place of the beans. So that's a definite option to consider. There's a bunch of different reasons for companion planting. So you have flavor enhancement, where borage and strawberries, the borage helps bring in the pollinators that's going to pollinate the strawberries, but it also can help make the strawberries even taste better. Basil and tomatoes are another one. If only we could grow that mozzarella in with the basil and tomatoes as well, but they enhance the flavor, and that's kind of a good reason to think about planting companions. There's also the idea of kind of security through diversity and hedging your investment. So planting a wide variety of crops together, something's going to work. So here we've got beets, broccoli, and radishes, and these work really well together because the radishes are going to grow up first, and they're going to be out of there really fast. The beets are going to be probably the next thing, and then by the time the broccoli needs more space, those other two crops have already been pulled out, and that's kind of a nice option. There's also, utilizing different layers. So here we've got eggplant and carrots. The eggplant is kind of a big bushy plant, doesn't have a huge root structure that is growing underneath the ground, and the carrots have kind of long, the long skinny roots, and kind of more feathery foliage up above. And so you can kind of utilize both layers, the underground and the above ground, and let those crops kind of intermix a little bit, but they're both going to thrive in that environment. Nurse cropping is another great example of kind of a reason to companion plant. I always plant my radishes and my carrots together. I dig one little furrow. I, spread the radish seeds in the furrow. I spread the carrot seeds in the furrow, and then I pinch them shut. The radishes come up really fast. Usually by, a month in, the radishes are ready to be harvested, and at that point, carrots can be really slow to germinate. And usually by the time the radishes are ready, the carrots are maybe like 2-3 inches tall, and then you've actually doubled the amount of production you're getting from that space just by having the carrots and the radishes growing together. Onions and lettuce can do a similar thing, where you can get the lettuce crop to grow, and then it's gonna outcompete any weeds that would be underneath and in between those onions. Onions aren't very weed competitive, but putting lettuce in there, you can harvest that lettuce and then leave lots more room for the onions to continue to mature and grow. Trap cropping is another option. So thinking about nasturtiums, can attract aphids. So sometimes if you have like basil that you're wanting to pull aphids away from, you could put nasturtiums in there. If you're trying to grow the nasturtiums, that doesn't help you very much, but that is an option. I also think of like flea beetles with, arugula and radishes. They tend to be really good trap crops for flea beetles away from, maybe your kohlrabi or your kale or your broccoli, cabbage, things like that. So you can actually kind of deter the pests to go to a different crop, but just by putting something out that they like better. If you're trying to grow, the arugula and radishes, then you probably want to cover those with a fabric just to protect them from the flea beetles, but you can use them as a trap crop as well. Potatoes and beans, this is one that we tried for years and years, did lots of research on, and it just, year after year, we found that when we planted the potatoes and the beans kind of every other row, we ended up with a lot less Colorado potato beetles. Like there's something about the beans that mask the potatoes from the Colorado potato beetles. There's also supposed to be the alternate reaction too, where the potatoes are supposed to help keep Mexican bean beetles out of the beans. I haven't really seen those in Minnesota much at all, so I don't know if that works or not, but that's another option. The potatoes also tend to like pull a lot of nutrients out of the soil. They're a heavy feeder, and the beans, if you inoculate them, so you get this like black powdery substance from the store, bring it home, add some water, dredge your beans through it before you plant them out, then they've got that mycorrhizae in the soil, and they can actually pull nutrients out of the soil, out of the air, and bring them down into the roots zone. And as those roots decompose, they'll actually add that fertility back to the soil that the potatoes are utilizing. So that's kind of a fun combination that just seems to work really well. And it doesn't matter really what kind of beans, if they're dry beans, if they're green beans. I've used wax beans. I've tried even other legumes like cowpeas seem to work as well. So there's definitely some benefits there with the beans and the potatoes, growing those together. Just general pest suppression, so cabbage and marigolds. I think that, all of the brassica crops, the cabbages, the kale, kohlrabi, those kind of crops tend to have a lot of like cabbage looper pests on them. The cabbage loopers, the white diamond moths, all of those kind of caterpillars. Having crops like dill and cilantro nearby and letting them flower, those flowers and the flowers of the marigolds will actually attract a lot of the parasitic wasps that will take care of those pests for you. And so just having an abundance of flowers and letting things flower, cilantro and dill, a lot of times we want to like, once they start flowering, we're like, oh, they're no good anymore. But no, let them flower, let them be the beneficial insect habitat that you need, and that'll control a lot of the pests for you. Just having, habitat for good insects is so important in the garden. I remember once like wandering through the orchard area and looking up and just noticing tons of baby or the larva of ladybugs up in a tree and in a fruit tree. And I looked closer, and then all of a sudden I realized that like, oh, it was covered with aphids, and they were just chowing down, having a big, buffet lunch on the aphids. And I just created the habitat where I had habitat for those ladybugs, and they were like taking care of the pests for me, and I didn't really even have to do anything. So having lots of flowers, having that positive hosting that's going to recruit the insects that you need to control the pests that you have is really important. And just creating those ecosystems where they do the work for you, and then you don't have to like go buy sprays or do anything other than just watch it all happen. It's really fun. Pattern disruption, this is another way to kind of foil pests, where you've got onions and catnip and radish and lettuce and marigolds, and by just having something different right next to it. So let's say that flea beetle lands on the radish and it takes a bite and it's like, yum, and then it jumps to the next leaf, and the next leaf isn't a radish leaf, it's actually a lettuce leaf, and it takes a bite of that and it's like, oh, that's not what I wanted. And then it flies away because you've disrupted the pattern. And so just having that diversity can be really helpful in the garden. There are a number of different ways to think about doing companion planting. You can kind of have row intercropping, where you have two crops that are grown together with at least one of them in rows. So here we have corn and radishes and carrots. The corn is in a row, but the radishes and the carrots are kind of sprinkled in amongst them. Again, those those carrots are going to be, or the radishes are going to be done first, then the carrots, and then the corn. Strip intercropping is another option. So this is kind of growing 2 crops in strips that are wide enough where they kind of interact, but they all have their amount of room that they need. In this picture, that okra, it's got dill, okra, and Brussels sprouts, and the okra probably doesn't have quite enough room. Ideally, it would probably have even a little bit more room than that. It'd be bigger and bushier. The Brussels sprouts are kind of overcrowding the okra, but the dill and the Brussels sprouts are definitely having that like positive effect, where the dill is hosting all the insects that are the predators for the cabbage moss, which is really good. Mixed intercropping is another option, growing 2 or more crops together in no distinct row or arrangement. So here you've got leeks, radishes, and spinach. And so that's another good kind of option where, again, the radishes are going to be done first, then the spinach, then the leeks. Companion planting options, relay intercropping. So here's the idea where you're going to actually plant a second crop into a standing crop at a time when the standing crop is at the reproductive stage but before harvesting. So this is usually like if you wanted to try to plant a cover crop in the understory of your plantings. This is usually done around the 4th of July here in Minnesota. It's always been a challenge for me to get this to work because that time of year is just so busy. You're kind of like finishing planting everything and just starting to really get on the harvest cycle. And so that can be kind of a challenge, but that's kind of the time that you would do that. I'm going to pause here before I finish the companion plantings for any questions.
Oh, so many questions. Okay, the first one we're going to go with is Lucy just sent this in, and I haven't gotten a chance to send her anything. Does mixed intercropping affect flavors?
If you have like distinct different crops, I mean, I think they're only going to be of beneficial flavors. If you're trying to do seed saving and you have multiple different varieties, you could potentially impact that, but otherwise it shouldn't affect the flavor of the individual crops. No.
Okay. Excuse me. And Sherry just wanted you to repeat, what are you putting on the bean seeds? Inoculant?
Inoculant, yes.
Okay.
Garden inoculant, there's usually like different inoculants for different species of legumes, but usually there's like a garden inoculant for bean seeds that you would use. Or there's also an inoculant for peas. Those are probably the 2 main ones.
Okay, and Rachel would like to know where you get it.
I would check garden centers. You can also check seed companies. A lot of times the seed companies that will sell the bean and pea seeds you can also buy inoculant from.
Okay, and Anne wants to know, are beans beneficial to potatoes grown in grow bags?
If you have a lot of Colorado potato beetles, I would think about it. In a grow bag, you're usually, I guess it depends on too if you're reusing that soil from year to year, or if you're just like composting it or what you're doing with it. If you're trying to replenish the nutrients then in it, then yeah, it would definitely have a positive effect to put some beans in there as well. Okay. That could be really cool, having like beans overflowing out of the top, like pole beans or something. Yeah.
And Vanessa wants to know, how do you grow beans with potatoes if you're hilling soil around the potatoes as they grow?
I usually just have them nearby. So it doesn't like, it could be kind of like the next row over. It could be kind of, it doesn't have to be like right up next to it. Within, a couple of feet is more than enough usually.
Okay.
It's tricky, but it can be done, I promise.
Anne wants to know, are there good online resources for intercropping advice? So it seems a little tricky, at least to me it does.
I mean, I would say like play with it and just, try different combinations and keep track of what works and what doesn't work. There's not a ton of like hard science behind it. There are a lot of books. There's like Carrots Love Tomatoes and things like that, but I don't know of any like great online resources. No.
Okay, and the one other question that I'm gonna decide is in this section is how close do you place drip irrigation to placement of crop seeds?
You want to do them pretty darn close.
I mean, I
Like
do it within an inch
like
or so,
probably
but
drip irrigation usually like is gonna spread maybe 6 inches around it. So you want to be in that same zone for your seeds. So you don't necessarily want to be right on top of it, but you want to be right next to it if you can be. Excellent.
okay. And the rest of these, yeah, I have a
We'll come
feeling
back
we're
to it.
getting to it.
Okay.
Oh, wait, there's one more seed question.
Yeah.
Um, independent brick and mortar stores in the Minneapolis area with the widest variety of seeds. I suggested checking our discount partner list, but
Yeah.
do you know anything off the top of your head?
I have not been out and about, so I do not know, unfortunately. If other people have suggestions, they could definitely put them in the chat. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that, places like Bachman's, places, Wagner's, places, garden centers are going to have a good variety of, seeds.
Okay, and the rest of them we will get to in a bit. Let's
Okay,
keep going.
sounds good. Cool, thanks. Just a couple more examples of companion planting before we get to the next section. This is another one that I really like, this idea of using kind of teepees or trellising, where you've got things growing up the outside and then other things growing inside that can tolerate a little bit more shade. So having lettuce growing underneath cucumbers or growing beans or peas outside with cabbages or Asian greens on the inside. And the idea is to just really interplant flowers with everything. It's really beautiful, and it makes for good habitat. This is an example early on at the farm where we had like probably even a little bit too much. This was the first year where we were really experimenting with this, and you can see each one of these little stakes was a different crop. So it was cosmos, corn, bush beans, pumpkins, broccoli, marigolds, chard, kohlrabi, more chard, more catnip, and it was just kind of a little crazy and insane in terms of just almost too much. We almost had it was a jungle towards the end of the season where it was a treasure hunt every day to go see what we could find to harvest, but it worked really, really well, and it sort of had this overflow to the whole area, even where we weren't doing the companion planting, where we had just an overabundance of insect pollinators and good insects to really be predators for the bad pests, and that worked really well. Okay, I'm going to keep going into crop rotation, and then we'll pause in a little bit for more questions. So crop rotation is the idea that you have two crops that are different botanically. They're not going to make the same demands on the soil for nutrients, and they're not going to share the same pests or insects or diseases that are grown back to back. So, you might have tomatoes that you're growing one year, and then the next year you want to put something that's not in that nightshade family after it in that same spot. I know this can be hard in small gardens because you've only got like one good sunny space for tomatoes, but and we'll talk a little bit about what you can do, to sort of if you can't do crop rotation, what to do. But ideally, you're rotating your crops around so that you can create a really healthy environment for your plants. At Cornucopia, this was the crop rotation that we used. We just said we weren't going to plant the same crops from the same family back to back in the same season or from season to season. So it's really important then to know which crops belong to which families. And there are a bunch of families. There are these are mostly the main vegetable families, so brassicas, cucurbits, alliums, umbels, chennopods or goosefoot, legumes, selenium or nightshades, poaceae or grass, and then the aster family. And here's just an example of like a 3-year crop rotation. So the first year in a space you would have roots and bulbs, then the next year you would put fruits and seeds in that area, and then leaf and stem the 3rd year, and then you'd go back the 4th year to the root and bulb kind of section. So just going through those families and kind of who belongs to what. You have the mustard or the brassica family. So this is your broccoli, your cabbage, your kale, collards, mustard, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, pak choi, bok choy. All those Asian greens are typically in this family. Turnips, radishes, those are in this family as well. Cucurbits, these are all your kind of vining crops. So things like cucumbers and squashes, pumpkins, zucchinis, gourds, melons. They're all in this family. Allium, these are your onions and your shallots, scallions, garlic, lilies, leeks. The goosefoot is primarily just chard, spinach, and beets. There are a couple other weedy relatives in there that you might see, like pigweed and lamb's quarter in your garden, but those all belong to this family. The nightshades, the tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, and peppers. Legumes, so this is beans, soybeans, peas, peanuts, clovers, and vetch. Jicama, fun fact, is also a legume, which never makes sense to me, but it is, which is kind of fun. Grass family, this is corn, popcorn, wheat, rice, oats, and rye. The umbel family is carrots, parsnips, dill, parsley, cilantro, and celery. And so what you do is you take those families and you can kind of create a crop rotation using them. So in this simple crop rotation, you've got brassicas that are followed by root crops, that are followed by legumes, that are followed by kind of the others, that are followed by the cucurbits. And sometimes it works well to just kind of have a catch-all like others if they don't distinctly fall into one of the other crops families. And so the idea is that you're just, not repeating the same family back to back. You're kind of spacing out which crops use which nutrients. I'll give you some more examples here. So this is another one where you've got legumes, roots, fruits, and leaves, and you're rotating them in a 4 kind of year rotation. One of the biggest challenges with this kind of a system is that if you kind of have to have 4 equal spaces, or be willing to like grow, if you have a bigger space that you're going to grow for one thing one year, then next year you're going to grow, if you have a big legume spot, then you might need to have that might need to be a bigger spot for leaf crops the next year, or fruit crops the following year, root crops. So thinking about that can be kind of a challenge, but it can work really well. Here's another example. So this leaf or legumes, leaves, roots, and fruits. So this just gives you an idea of kind of what the nutrient needs are for that rotation. So the legumes are going to fix nitrogen when you add that inoculant. The leaves are kind of using more of the nitrogen versus the phosphorus is getting used up by the fruits, and the potassium is used by the roots. So this just gives you an idea of how that visually would work going around in the garden. You can also do it just based on nitrogen use, where you've got heavy feeders, you've got medium feeders, light feeders, and heavy givers. So those legumes are the heavy givers. The light feeders are more like the roots and the alliums. The medium feeders are greens and brassicas, and then your cucurbits, nightshades, pumpkins, and corn can be heavier users. And that gives you an idea of what visually that would look like as well. If you've got a bigger garden, you might even want to think about having like 2 different crop rotations happening side by side. And so here you've got like brassicas that are going to move to where the corn and the pumpkins were, and then the legumes and the roots, and then the alliums, or another one with greens, cucurbits, a fallow area that might be cover cropped, and then a nightshade area that would rotate around as you go. And with crop rotations, I think it's really important to just kind of keep a record of what you planted where. They can be as elaborate and complex or as simple as you want. With us, at one point we had like an 11-year crop rotation that we were trying. And then, as soon as we got like a research project that needed more of space for one crop than we had allocated in that 11-year plan, we kind of threw that out the window and then just moved to that. Okay, we're not going to plant, we're going to keep track of what we planted where last year, and then rotate around so that we're not repeating the families back to back. This can really help prevent disease and pests, and even nutrient uses, kind of evening that out. If you end up having like a disease that's really specific to a crop or a crop family, like blights and nightshades, you're going to want to make sure that you don't put the nightshades in that same spot the next year, Same with like if you have a pest outbreak of like flea beetles in the brassicas, you want to not put brassicas there next year because those insects actually overwinter in the soil, and if they wake up to an all-you-can-eat buffet, they're gonna have a feast. So that's important to think about too. And adding compost can kind of help alleviate problems if you can't rotate. So amending your soil with compost from year to year, or even within the same season, that can really help mitigate some of those nutrient issues and even help with some of the disease and pest issues as well. And it's just a good practice for your soil. I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions.
Oh, yes. So let's see, where can I start with? Let's start with what besides marigolds are good flowers to plant with your crops, and what are ones that you can use in shadier gardens? And that's for Sue.
I like to grow a lot of herbs that eventually will flower. So things like thyme, summer savory, the cilantro and the dill, those are really good. And those should all tolerate some partial shade conditions. You know, honestly, there aren't a ton of flowers that are like bad for pollinators. So, you know, I think, you know, my favorites are usually things like cosmos and sunflowers. Bachelor buttons I like a lot. I like calendula a lot. Those flowers that can, you know, double as edible in your salad are always fun too. Yeah.
Hey, Don wants to know, how do you work in perennial crops, excuse me, like bunching onions, chives, and asparagus?
I usually just let them have their own spot and leave them in the same spot. You're just going to have an asparagus patch that's going to be your asparagus patch from year to year to year. And you're not really going to move that or rotate it around. You can always amend that soil with compost, but perennials don't really work with rotations. You don't, it's way too much work to move them. Yeah.
Okay. And Vanessa has a complicated question. Please talk about balancing crop rotation with intercropping, companion planting, and other strategies that mix and match the plants in a particular area.
Yeah, so typically, like if I was going to do the beans and the potatoes in an area, then wherever I planted that the next year, I would want to make sure that I wasn't planting more nightshades or more legumes in that same spot the following year, or I wasn't following them by those crops. So the other thing with the companion plantings that you can also do is kind of, you know, group them together and then just kind of clump them and try to just mix and match so that they aren't repeating the same pattern. It can get kind of crazy. And if I have like, you know, we'll talk about successions here in a second, which is going to even doubly compound the planting plan. But I think that, you know, also like using companions that are flowers kind of can nullify some of those, you know, issues of, because flowers are either usually in the composite family or they're in their own family that none of the vegetable crops belong to too. And so that makes that easy as well.
Okay, we have a bunch of timing questions, which I'm going to hold for the end.
Okay, sounds good.
So go for it.
Okay, so successions then are this idea of growing different crops back to back within the same season, so that you can have like a continuous harvest of something. So you're basically like using the same space for multiple crops, and the timing of those crops so that you have, like, if you want to eat fresh salad greens from your garden all season long, how do you do that? And so you can do that in a number of different ways. Typically, you're going to want to basically start with, you know, different crops and then plant them throughout the season. So with the lettuce example, oftentimes I would plant lettuce like every 2 weeks in the garden so that I can have a continuous harvest of them. But then, you know, you've got, you know, when that first batch of lettuce is done, instead of just leaving that be like an empty spot for the rest of the season, you want to put something else in that spot so that you can, you know, have more harvest and you're utilizing all your space to maximize production. So the idea is that you could have like spinach followed by lettuce followed by radishes, or peas followed by parsnips, or cilantro followed by radishes followed by lettuce. And it's really easy to do with short season crops. There are a bunch of crops that, you're just usually going to put one planting of them in per season and just let them go, and you're not going to really do this with them. So here's like tomatoes, winter squash, edamame. These are like long season crops that typically have a long time in the garden, and there's just not a lot of time on either end to really plant something on either end. You could push it. There's no reason why you couldn't put some radishes in right now and then wait till June 1st to have your tomatoes be planted and get a harvest of radishes in before then. But for the most part, you're looking at shorter season crops that you can do two-way successions with. So peas followed by carrots, or spinach followed by eggplants, bunching onions followed by chard, turnips followed by, or lettuce followed by turnips. In Minnesota, we can even get like a three-way succession for some crops. Peas, broccoli, spinach, bok choy, bush beans, lettuce, spinach, cucumbers, radishes, onions, radishes, lettuce, radishes, carrots, spinach. You get the idea. And there's even some four-season kind of trickery that, or four-way, options that you have. Garlic's kind of a cheater crop because that one doesn't go in until October. So if you can get, peas, bok choy, and spinach in, and then put your garlic in October, that kind of counts as four crops. But otherwise, spinach I like to grow at the very beginning of the season and the very end of the season. Otherwise, during the middle of the summer, it tends to bolt and just not grow very well. We have too many hours of daylight for it to really succeed. And so it works best if you can kind of squeeze it in at the beginning of the season or the end of the season. Pea shoots are another one. They take like 14 days to grow from when you plant them. And so that can be a really quick crop to throw in and just have a nice, something different coming out of the garden later in the season. Scallions, lettuce, spinach, radishes. You can see there's just a lot of different options. And basically, we have, 175 days between April 20th and October 15th. That's kind of, it's not quite to our frost-free time. Like we could still get a frost between April 20th and May 15th, but typically all of these crops, if you planted them now, they're going to be fine. They're not going to really balk at even a little snow or a little frost. And so they work to you can stack these to get to that 175 days, and making a plan is kind of fun. So how do I plan? I make a list of the crops I want to grow. I kind of allocate how much space is going to be needed per crop. I think about the frequency of planting. So if I want to have lettuce every 2 weeks that I plant, I gotta have to make sure I have room for that in my garden. I figure out what the first planting dates are going to be, and then what the subsequent planting dates are going to be for those succession crops, and map out the space just to make sure I have enough room. And then I make a plan that's by the week. So the first week of the year is January 1st. I know that the 15th week of the year is right around April 15th. The 40th week of the year is right around October 1st or 15th or something like that. And so I go by the week and I make my list of things I'm going to do each week throughout the season. And then I keep records so that I know what worked and what didn't, and then adjust the plan for the following year. And I find that really works well. If you try to give yourself okay, April 23rd, I'm going to go out and do this and this and this and this, and then you missed it, you can beat yourself up over that. Versus if you give yourself a whole week, and even if you get behind by a week, it's not that big of a deal. You have to have some flexibility in there. So I'm going to have one more poll question here, and then we can take a bunch of questions. What will you try this year? Are you going to try companion planting? Are you going to try successions? Are you going to try crop rotation? And this is another one where you can choose more than one. So that's kind of fun. And you can also add some questions into the chat if you have them. And we'll get to those in just a second. And we have a little bit of time for questions, so that's nice before we're running over. So we've got about 63% of people have voted so far. We'll give it just another couple of seconds. So right now it looks like About 79% of you are going to try companion planting. Awesome. 48% are going to try crop rotation, and 63% are going to try successions. Excellent. And so I just wanted to make sure you are all aware of the Hort Society membership that we have. For $62, you get a subscription to Northern Gardener Magazine. You get discounts on all of a bunch of different garden centers, wineries, and specialty shops. There's free webinars like this one that are available to you. Also discounts on other classes, workshops, and events. 2 free tickets to the Minneapolis Home and Garden Show. And then there's also a really fabulous e-newsletter that goes out monthly with all kinds of good stuff. And I think we've actually been doing that one bi-monthly, just with all this kind of crazy COVID-19 things happening right now. So I'm going to open it up for questions. Deborah, what do we got?
Okay, so we've got a bunch. So the first one I'm going to have you answer is one from the very beginning. Is Anita says that she'd be interested in hearing what variety of peach tree can be grown in Minnesota and where they can be purchased. I think that's a pretty important question, honestly.
Awesome.
I'd like to know.
The varieties that do best here are Contender and Reliance are the two. I've also heard good things about Red Haven. I have a friend in Richfield that has a Red Haven peach tree. And they don't get quite as big as other peaches from other places, but man, they taste just as good when they are ripe and ready to go. I would check garden centers. I know Eggplant carries peaches. I believe Mother Earth Gardens does. I believe I wouldn't even be surprised if like Bachman's or places like that also carry them.
I think I saw them at Bachman's a couple of years ago, but it's been a while, so nobody quote me on that.
I have one on from Eggplant.
Mary wants to know if you do more intensive planting, excuse me, planning. Yes, we do more intensive planting. If you do more intensive planting, what kind of fertilizing and soil additions should you add and when?
So I like to amend the soil with compost kind of at the beginning of the season typically. You can also do it, you know, in between plantings if you're doing intensive plantings. I also like to water in my freshly planted things with a fish emulsion dilution and kind of drench the plants either in it beforehand, before I plant them, or as I'm planting them. I actually have a little like hose, end of the hose sprayer kind of thing that I can actually put the fish emulsion into and then dial it to like, you know, 2 ounces per gallon and then water the plants in with that. That's definitely the easiest way to do it. I find that adds just a little bit of fertility when they're getting started. You get a lot less transplant shock and just happier plants that do better with that. And then I just keep an eye on things. If things need, you know, if things are looking nutrient deficient as throughout the season, then I might do another like foliar spray of the fish emulsion, or, you know, add more compost or something like that. But I think that typically helps. And doing a soil test before you get started too can really help. The U of M soil test clinic is still open. You can mail in samples. They'll mail you back your results. That's a great way to do that.
Okay, we are going to get to the rest of the questions, but keeping in mind that some people need to leave at 1, I'm just going to make a little last announcement, and then we will get to the rest of the questions that you guys are still sending, which is great. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. Once we're done here today, you will be getting a survey, and we would really appreciate it if you would complete it and give us your feedback. And you'll also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. So if there's anything you want to miss or anything you missed, anything you want to go over again, you'll be able to do that. So on behalf of the Minnesota State Horticultural Society and all of us here, thank you for joining us today. Stay safe, and we're gonna answer some more questions, or I'm gonna read questions. And Courtney is going to answer them. Okay, so the next one is from Susan, who's on the shore of Lake Superior and really wants to grow basil, but it doesn't grow well. Can she do it in a pot? How do we cheat this?
Basil likes it warm. It's really a warm season crop. So anything that you can do, I might suggest using a low tunnel. So taking some kind of structure, you can bend wire, you can use electrical conduit to make like a frame, and then putting plastic over it is a really great option to hold more heat in up there where it's kind of chilly. So that would be a great option and probably the easiest way. It doesn't have to be real big, but that, you probably want it at least kind of a low tunnel, 2 to 3 feet high, just to hold the basil in and to keep that heat in better would work well.
Okay. Jennifer wants to know, can you address any timing differences between the Twin Cities and Zone 3B, like in Walker?
I mean, you're gonna have a shorter season for sure, which I'm sure you experience in terms of planting things out. But and I think things are just gonna be, it's gonna take longer to warm up, and it's gonna get colder faster. So condensing those things, but they should still, it still gets plenty warm up there. So
Do you
yeah.
know how much of a difference there is, or?
I mean, I want to say that usually what we can plant here May 15th, they have to wait till June 1st, would be my best guess.
Okay. So 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Michelle wants to know if you have any tips to get marigolds to germinate indoors.
I have not, well, I've done them in a greenhouse plenty of times. I haven't done them in my like basement setup yet. I would guess, they like it probably a little bit on the cooler side. So if you have a really warm area that you're trying to germinate them in, might need it to be a little cooler. They would probably be a really great one for winter sowing, to be honest. I'd maybe try that. Sort of like cheating and doing it outside, but still in a container that you can easily, transplant from.
Okay. Carolyn wants to know, have you ever planted annual rye to control weeds between rows?
We planted rye early on. I actually like white Dutch clover a whole lot better than rye. Rye can be tricky in terms of getting it to winter kill, or it doesn't really winter kill, it overwinters. And so then you're like
So
struggling with trying to get rid of it in the springtime. Versus
annual in name only.
clover. What was that?
Annual in name only.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, it can be a challenge. But white Dutch clover is so easy. You just mow it in between the rows. It's going to fix nitrogen. It's going to provide habitat for the good insects. It's really pretty. It's really nice to walk on. Rye can be kind of pokey because it's a grass, and it can get kind of grassy and woodier as it matures. And so, yeah.
Okay. On that note, what do you suggest for cover crops? Brenda would like some help with that.
I like white Dutch clover. I think oats is a good one. I think peas is another good one. They're way more benign, and they're gonna winter kill easier in a garden. So you can do those kind of at the end of the season, and that can work really well. Buckwheat is a really great one if you're trying to just smother weeds. It's also really good habitat for good insects. Those are kind of my favorites.
Bobby says, I've read that we can get 2 broccoli crops. If you start broccoli seeds indoors in July, do you think that would work?
Definitely. I think there are, it's hard to get like the early season of broccoli. In Minnesota, it's just cold. So typically it's kind of midsummer, but then you can definitely get a fall crop later as well. I've definitely done that. I actually think that like cauliflower is another one that it actually, if you start the seeds in June and then transplant them in July, right around the 1st of July, you get like the best crop that I've ever gotten was when I followed that kind of timing.
Okay. For crop rotation, how big of a space do you need for each area you're rotating? For example, in a 4-foot by 8-foot bed, do you split it into 2 sections? Do you split it into 8 sections?
I would probably do 2 sections in that kind of space. If you do much smaller than that, it's not really, I mean, any kind of rotation you can do is going to be better than not, but having it be a little bit better will make it just that much easier.
Okay. Back to the peaches. Are they for zone 4 or zone 3?
I know they're at least zone 4. I'm not sure about zone 3. We'd probably have to look that up.
Okay. And do you need to plant more than one peach tree variety for pollination?
I actually don't think you do. I have a neighbor across my alley that has, I believe, just one peach tree and has gotten good peaches for years, and she just has one. So, yeah.
I think everybody listening to this now desperately wants peach trees. I know I do. But, I mean, I have for a while, but
I'm with you. They're in a time investment. You're not going to have peaches the first year. It'll probably take even 3 or 4 years, but then they have consistently produced for me for several years. Last year was the one year that like was a bad peach year and I didn't get any peaches. But I'm hoping this year is better.
Althea wants to know the best way to save space for tomatoes. Can you only use determinant if you want to use the string method? I'm not sure what the string method is.
I think like determinant are going to be more compact and smaller versus indeterminate are going to keep growing. I mean, you can do a lot with pruning with tomatoes. You can prune them down to kind of 1 main leader, and that would save you some space with either determinate or indeterminate. You just have to give it more room to grow up. So I would think more about pruning. You're going to get fewer fruits, but they'll be, you know, great fruits when you get them. Yeah.
Okay. Amy wants to know if you've used purple clover in rotation.
I've used red clover. I don't know about purple clover. White Dutch is my favorite. It just stays more compact. The red clovers tend to get bigger than the white clover. The clover kind of has like an 8-inch, you know, nice height, and it responds really, really well to mowing. The red clovers just are kind of bigger and more denser plants, but they would still work just fine and be great for your rotation.
With the white clover, do you have problems with stepping on bees?
If I have stepped on a bee, I've never noticed it. Like I've never been stung by a bee from stepping on clover. And I've grown a lot of clover. I grew clover in between all of my rows of all of my beds at the farm. So we're talking like acres of clover. And I've never had that problem. So as long as you have shoes and you're not walking barefoot through the garden, yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. Kylie would like to know if you have any suggestions for keeping gophers out of the garden.
Boy, that's a tough one. I kind of coexisted with them.
Webinar, but I'm sorry, I talked over you.
No, it's okay. I kind of just learned to coexist with them more than anything else, sadly. Know that they're gonna chomp on stuff.
Yeah. We did have a webinar a while back on humane critter control, and I know that the author has done several presentations for us, but I am blanking on her name. Maybe Lara.
It's Teresa Rooney.
Thank you, Lara.
You're welcome.
That's Lara, everybody. She's in charge of all of this. Does clover spread into the grass?
It might, but it tends to, like, if you keep mowing it, it'll outcompete most things. Grass is one of those things that kind of will learn to coexist with, I would say, more than anything else. And it does kind of slowly flop into the beds if you have it in your pathways, but I've found that it's really easy to kind of pull back with the rake and then mow the edge, and then it stays where it can be. It can also, if it flops like under your broccoli plants, it'll actually suppress the weeds that might be coming up under the broccoli plants too. So you have to sort of decide, do you want it to flop or not, and then manage it however you want to.
Okay. Michelle wants to know, should I put my butter lettuce and arugula outside in their containers now? And what about herbs?
I would say, most of those cool season crops can go out now with no problem. Herbs, if it's basil, I would definitely keep it inside for a little bit longer. If it's, a perennial herb, throw it out. It's going to be fine. Oregano and thyme, things like that should be just fine. Even I've got cilantro that actually has reseeded in one of the beds that's coming up already. It's a couple inches tall already. So it's fine. Yeah, I would think most of the herbs will be fine. The lettuce should be fine at this point.
Okay. Rebecca would like some pepper suggestions because she has the same problem that I've had, which is you buy the plant and the fruits aren't ripe by the time snow hits.
Yeah, that can be tricky. Definitely starting out with healthy plants at the beginning of the season can be helpful. Giving them as much heat as you can. So maybe putting a low tunnel over it can be helpful in terms of they're really like that heat, and they need a lot of heat to flower and produce fruits and have those fruits mature. The other trick that is to just like right before the frost is coming, to go through and actually harvest them all and bring them inside and kind of like let them sit at maybe room temperature-ish, and that on newspaper or something like that in a single layer, and then you can actually keep ripening them inside too.
I'm sorry, you said a low tunnel, right?
Yep, a low tunnel. So the like under plastic. And it's important to be able to sort of vent those sides and pull those up, so it does get good air circulation and you're not creating an oven. But the peppers, they really like the heat. So anything you can do to increase heat is going to be a good idea.
Yeah, there is a fine line between increasing heat and accidentally solarizing your bed.
Yes, definitely.
And Sue, who has been waiting so patiently since the beginning, she says, my garden is a water trough from Fleet Farm and measures roughly 8 foot by 3 foot. I also have 3 large pits and 4 window boxes. Area gets sun about 8 hours, so I've grown your suggested shady plants. How would you suggest using this small space, and how close together can I plant?
I mean, it depends on what you're going to plant so much. Tomatoes, yeah, they probably want at least 18 inches, all the way around them to grow and be happy. Lettuces you can plant within 6 inches of each other. It just kind of depends on the crop, and you can usually squeeze things a little bit tighter than what it says on their tags. But just experiment with it, and if stuff seems like it's getting, smothered from each other, you might just have to harvest things sooner.
Okay. And the only other question we have is a technical question on webinar playback. So Lara, if I could get you to take care of this one. I'm not sure if she's here. Okay.
Sure, Deborah. What's the question?
Margaret wants to know can you pause the webinar so you can take notes? Basically, she actually asked, are your webinars available on a PDF so info can be brought back and stopped for note taking? but since everyone is going to have access to a recording, is there a way to pause it when you're
Yep,
replaying?
pause it. You can pause it when you replay it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'll send her an email.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we had lots of thank yous. Sue says, unfortunately, it's too shady for her tomatoes. Oh, and we have a peach update from Jennifer, who says, just reading about peaches in Minnesota, U of M suggests you plant 2 trees 12 to 20 feet apart for pollination. So there you go. There's our last peach update. We are all set. Thank you all very much for hanging in and waiting for your questions to be answered. We really appreciate it. And I think we're all set. So I am going to stop the recording. So thank you all very much. Again, you will get a survey that we're asking for feedback, and you will get a link to the recording within a couple of days. So take care, everyone. Stay safe.